Okay, so this time we'll discuss the underlying assumptions. So these are assumptions, di ba, mga assumptions. So while doing accounting, natay mga dapat mga assumptions nato, di ba, in accounting the transactions. So accounting assumptions are basic notions or fundamental premises on which the accounting process is based. We base our accounting process based on some assumptions. So accounting assumptions are also known as postulates. So assumptions are also known as postulates. So assumptions serve as the foundation or bedrock of accounting in order to avoid misunderstanding, but rather enhance the understandability and usefulness of the financial statement. So therefore, these assumptions, di ba, magamit nato ni, di ba, these are the foundations. This will serve as our foundation in accounting. Di ba, in order to avoid misunderstanding and enhance the understanding and usefulness of the financial statement. So we use these assumptions. Okay. So the conceptual framework for financial reporting mentions only one assumption. So take note of this, that even the revised conceptual framework, the only assumption mentioned in the revised conceptual framework is the going concern assumptions. But aside from going concern assumptions, we have still another basic assumptions. Diba? However, implicit in accounting are the basic assumptions of accounting entity, time period, and monetary unit. Even though these three assumptions are not mentioned anymore in the revised conceptual framework, but still we need to discuss this one because this is very essential, diba, in accounting. The accounting entity concept or the economic entity concept or the separate entity concept, the time period, and monetary unit assumptions. Again, assumptions, di ba? While doing accounting, mo nito mga assumptions, di ba, nga dapat going concern siya na accounting entity, time period, and monetary unit. Okay, again, this is foundation, the postulates, and the assumptions. Let's start with the only assumption mentioned in the revised conceptual framework, which is the going concern assumption. Okay, what do you mean by going concern assumption? The going concern or continuity assumption means that in the absence of evidence to the contrary, kung wala daw evidence nga makita, the accounting entity is viewed as continuing in operation indefinitely. Diba? Going concern. In other words, the financial statements are normally prepared in the assumption. We assume that the entity will continue in the operation for the foreseeable future. Di ba? May going concern pa dayon. Di ba? Question, nabay mga nagtukod og business nga next year magsirado na mi, nabay na magunahon na nga businessman. Di ba? Wala. Why? Because their assumption, di ba, nga nagtukod sila business, ang ilag yung assumption anak, amudugay among business. That is continuing in operation indefinitely. So that is going concern assumption, di ba? Wala may negosante nga magtukod to karog negosyo, next week magsirado ko, mag-abri na pug ko. Next month maglugi naman siguro mi next month, diba? Dili man inana kung negosyante ta. That's why that is going concern assumption. We think that our business will continue to operate indefinitely. Okay. Thus, the assets are normally recorded at cost. As a rule, market values are ignored. That's why, because of going concern assumption, we record the assets normally at cost. Okay, at cost na to sa gina-record ang atong mga assets, especially our property, plant, and equipment, and we depreciate it every year, di ba? So, for those ABM students, di ba, I know you're familiar with depreciation. So, we depreciate it, those property, plant, and equipment nga asset. Because of this going concern assumption, nga nang i-depreciate man sa every year because we assume that the asset magamit sa for indefinite, di ba? For pila ka years because we know that because our assumption is our business will continue to operate. So as a rule, market values are ignored because we record it at cost. Okay, so that is going concern assumption. So we assume that the business entity will continue to operate, di ba, indefinitely. Okay, so sir, what if bankrupt na yun? Then therefore, the going concern assumption, wala na. Di na ka mag-assume because nag-file nag-bankruptcy. So human na because di ba pag file nag-bankruptcy, pasabot, they cannot continue to operate anymore. So, the going concern assumption, wala ka nag-assume nga magpadayon pa ka. Okay. Next is the accounting entity assumption. Say accounting entity assumption, in financial accounting, the accounting entity is the specific business organization, which may be a proprietorship, partnership, or a corporation. Okay. Under this assumption, the entity is separate from the owners, managers, and employees who constitute the entity. Okay, so pasabot ani, accounting entity assumption dapat daw kung naa kay negosyo, mo ni mo negosyo, ikaw tag iya, separate mo. Diba? Separate mo. Okay. Dapat tanan gasto ni negosyo nimo kang negosyo, tanan sales kang negosyo, tanan gasto kang negosyo. Imong personal gasto imo, imong personal income sa trabaho imo. Dili pwede nga ang imong personal expense ibutang nimo sa imong negosyo. Dili na sa pwede because again we have accounting entity assumption. Dapat the business entity is separate from the owner. Again, the business entity is separate from the owner. So, imong income ayaw ibutang dito. Not unless i-invest nimo, di ba? Ayaw isagol-sagol. Di ba? Dili pwede kay nagpalit kog sakyanan, personal lako nga sakyanan. Di ba? Wala gigamit sa business, gigamit nimo for sa imo, personal use nimo, pero gi-record nimo dito, that's wrong. Di ba? You're violating the accounting entity assumption. So kung imo sakyanan for personal use, then imo na siya. Ayaw i-account sa imong business. So that is separate or accounting entity assumption or separate entity assumption or economic entity assumption. Accordingly, the transaction of the entity shall not be merged, again, shall not be merged with the transaction of the owner. So again, dili isagol. Diba? So kung for those people nga nainegosyo, diba, mali na yung practice. Diba? Mali na yung practice. So we assume that the business is separate from the owner. Okay, so dapat transaction ni business kang business, transaction ni owner kang owner. Di dapat isagol. The reason for the entity assumption is to have fair presentation of the financial statements. Of course, di ba? Kay kung imong gipang sagol dito, ang report na magawas dili na sa reliable. Why? Because di ba dili ang business na nagamit ana, naay gisagol nga personal. Okay, to have a fair presentation, dapat separate siya. That is accounting entity assumption. You have time period assumption. Users of financial information need timely information for making an economic decision. The time period assumption requires that the indefinite life of an entity is subdivided into accounting periods which are usually of equal length for the purpose of preparing financial reports on financial position, performance, and cash flows. Di ba kagaina, we need to prepare financial statement at least annually. Diba? Although our assumption is going concern, the entity will operate for indefinite life, but again, we need to subdivide into accounting periods. So dapat natay periods, and we need to report at least annually. So therefore, we prepare financial statement every year. That is time period assumption. We need to prepare reports on a timely basis. And 'di ba kung timely ang report, syempre the users will need report on a timely basis, 'di ba? Kay karon kinahanglan ko mag-decide but the report ni abot next year na. Do you think the report is still relevant? Diba dili na because pwede ma-outro na ang decision ana ni user. By convention, the accounting period or fiscal period is 1 year or a period of 12 months. So diba because we prepare the report at least annually, so that's 1 year or 12 months period. So the accounting period may be calendar year. When you say calendar year, you start January 1, you end December 31. That is calendar. Based on the calendar, di ba? This January 1 ang start of the year, you end December 31. When you say natural business year, depende na sa business. So, mao po nitong gitawag nga fiscal year. So, kung nag-start ka og June 1, mo end ka og July 31 next year. Basta 12 months siya. Still 1 year. July 1, end ka og June 30 next year. Okay, so that is natural business year. So a calendar year is a 12-month period that ends on December 31, and natural business year is a 12-month period that ends on any month when the business is at the lowest or experiencing slack season. So again, kung may natural business year, depende na siya kung kano sa ka nag-start, mo po yung tawag na fiscal year. So, kung sa ka nag-start, July 1, end kag June 31. Basta 12 months siya. Okay. Then the last assumption is the monetary unit assumption. You say monetary unit assumption, the monetary unit assumption has two aspects, namely quantifiability and stability of the peso. So, when you say quantifiability aspect means that the asset, liabilities, equity, income, and expenses should be stated in terms of a unit of measure. Since we are in the Philippines, so quantifiability dapat atong panganlan. Diba? Ang atong asset, liabilities, equity, income, and expenses dapat nakapeso siya in the Philippines. Sir, what if na ay transaction sa gawas, you need to convert the transaction into peso. Kung dollars ang transaction, so i-convert mo siya into peso. Again, because you are in the Philippines, your report should be stated in terms of a unit of measure kung ang country naga-report. So, since sa Philippines, naka-peso siya. So, i-quantify na to, di ba, in peso. Okay, kaya kung walay pangalan sa mga dollars ba na, won ba na, di ba, inana siya. Then the stability of peso assumption means that the purchasing power of the peso is stable or constant and that its instability is insignificant and therefore may be ignored. So, stability of peso, 'di ba? The assumption means na the purchasing power, 'di ba? Ang purchasing power sa isa ka entity of the peso is stable or constant. So, stable or constant siya, and if its instability is insignificant, so dili sa necessary nga kung dili ba sa stable or dili. So we assume that the purchasing power is stable or constant, and if the instability is therefore may be ignored. Okay, the accounting function is to account for nominal peso only and not for constant pesos or changes in purchasing power. So again, the accounting function is to account for nominal pesos only and not for a constant pesos or changes in purchasing power, di ba? So sa illustration sa book, at palit sa equipment daw kani at cost, tapos pila ka years ang nilabay, if mo palit sa og kani nga equipment mo na ni ang cost niya, di ba? So dili necessary ang change, di ba, changes sa purchasing power nimo, di ba? So we assume that stable imong purchasing power, which is ang peso. But on the measurement, pwede nato sa i-measure, di ba, kung at cost siya, so katong after 5 years pila na ang value niya, so we can measure it at siguro at current value, depende of the company. Okay, I think that's all for the assumptions, di ba? So again, these assumptions are used in accounting. So when you do accounting, dapat naaning mga assumptions mo going concern niya nga entity, tapos dapat separate ang transaction ni business o ni owner. Then you have time period, dapat every year na ay reports because 'di ba kinahanglan siya sa mga users. Then monetary unit of assumption, 'di ba? I need to consider, 'di ba, dapat pangalan nako i-quantify nako ang mga transactions in peso sign or in peso. So that's all for this chapter. So I hope you have learned something. So thank you for listening.